Yeah, we're in this series, and we're looking at the Sermon on the Mount. If you don't know what the Sermon on the Mount is, it's one of the most straightforward, extended teachings where Jesus he actually just gives like practical commands. And if you're like me, I was talking to somebody yesterday, and like my brain is simple. I think about one thing. This is why when my wife sends me extra texts at the grocery store, I don't come home with that stuff because my brain is focused on the stuff that was in the first text. And I was talking to a friend yesterday, and they were telling me how they lost their water bottle. And I was like, you know what I do when I lose something? I just think, where would I put that thing right now if I had it? And then I go check that place. Because I'm literally that simple that oftentimes if I just do the thing that I would normally do, I go and I find it, and that's exactly where it is. And it was so funny because he had to run back to his house for something, and then he came back with his water bottle, and he's like, I did what you said, and it was exactly where I would have put it right now. So that's funny, but it's funny because that's how I'm wired, and maybe you're wired that way too. But so it's nice when Jesus just tells us what he means. There's a lot of times in Scripture where you read it, and you're like, not really sure. I think I see what he's saying there. But then when Jesus is just like lays it out, you're like, yeah, it's hard to get around that. And so we've been looking at some of these teachings and commands, and we've been calling this series the hill we die on, because Jesus goes up this hill and his disciples go up with him, and then he teaches them. And that hill becomes a place where we find our flesh is confronted and that it needs to die in order to go with Jesus, right? And this is a beautiful thing. It's not a bad thing. But it's also a hard thing because it's hard for our flesh to die. It's hard to put to death, our human nature and the things that we want. And so that's one reason. And then the other reason is just as a church, this is who we want to be. We want to be a church where we're not planting our flag on hills that are pointless. We're planting our flag on what Jesus commanded us to do. And we want to be that church. We want to be the church that lives that out. And that's hard. And it's a high goal. And it's a goal that we're going to fail. And we're going to have to come back and ask for forgiveness and repent to Jesus, and he'll forgive us because he's merciful and gracious, and then he'll ask us to continue to follow. And so that's where we want to be. Sometimes I think these kinds of sermons and series and everything can kind of come across a certain way, and it can be like, it can almost feel like a chore list, or all the things that I need to do that I'm not doing, or all the things that are really hard, and it's hard to measure up to that. Jesus, that's a high bar. We're going to see at the end of this our verses today, that Jesus tells us to be perfect. It's like, come on, how do we do that? That nobody's perfect. I'm pretty sure Miley Cyrus wrote a song about it. Deep cut. I showed my kids that song the other day, and they're like, Dad, you're such a boomer. I'm like, Hannah Montana is for boomers now? I'm like, you guys don't know. You don't know ball. But anyway, it can really come across like, and Jesus has given us these rules. He says over and over, and we've been looking at these statements where he says, you've heard it said, and he's referencing kind of like the teachings and the law and the understanding that the religious leaders of the time had given them about what they should do to follow God and to be, God's. And then he says, but I say this. And so there's this sort of, each one of these is sort of calling into question the common religious understanding or the wisdom that exists and existed at that time. And it calls into question ours too. And, but Jesus is always taking it further, right? He never made it easier. He was like, you've heard it, but actually just chill out on that. Relax. It's not a big deal. He's always like, no, I didn't just say don't murder. It's actually anger matters, You don't even get angry. And so this is what he's been doing, and he's been sort of inviting us to this deeper following, this deeper level, more challenging though. And, part of that, like I said, it comes across like a heavy burden, but it's funny because if you actually flip it, if you actually kind of turn the gemstone or whatever and see it from a different angle, what you actually start to notice is that he's actually calling us to freedom. And what seems like maybe it would be a heavy burden is actually releasing us from a life that's managed by all of these things. And so, if you think about it, we've talked about anger and lust and integrity and these kinds of things. And they're all things that if you don't deal with them, they can manage your life. You can live a life that's run by your anger. And we all know those people. Like, hey, don't say anything because he will go off. There's a name for those people. It's called Karen. No, I'm kidding. If you're named Karen in here, I love you. And I don't agree with the internet. They just needed a name for that. But, Jesus told the story of the prodigal son. And in the story of the prodigal son, he sort of followed his own way that this kid did. He walked his own path, and we live in a world that loves to walk their own path. We live in a world that's like, you do you, and don't let anybody tell you not to do you. And it led him to a certain place, right? He found himself in the pig pen, so hungry that he wanted to eat what the pigs had. I'm going to get whatever that is in my throat. I'm going to get it. But and this is kind of where that life takes you. Is like, this is what it, imagine your life if you were never to get free from your anger. It becomes like a pig pen that you live in. Or if you were ruled by your lust, it becomes a pig pen that you lived in. Or if no one trusts your word, it becomes a pig pen that you live in. And then imagine Jesus comes along and he says, hey, follow me. I can take you out of the pig pen. This actually sounds pretty good now, doesn't it? It's like what can get twisted to sort of feel like all this work we got to put in for Jesus actually becomes this thing that just actually sets us free. And that's what we're looking at today is this idea that you can get free, because there are expectations for what Jesus' followers will look like. I was thinking about this pig pen analogy. I was like, imagine this person is a real person and he's actually in the pig pen, okay? But he's like trying to act cool like he's not in the pig pen. You know what I mean? He's like, no, it's cool. I got it all together. Everything's fine. And everybody that sees him is like, but you're ankle deep, man. Like, we can see it. We can smell it. It's not fine, right? And that's kind of a silly image, right? But Jesus is confronting the Pharisees, right? They were in this pig pen, pretending that their righteousness was better than everyone else's, and Jesus is like, thank you so much. My wife, everyone. Okay, I'm gonna try not to kick that over. And I guess this is what Jesus, he's offering us a path out of the pig pen. Freedom from a life that's controlled by these things. And today Jesus offers us a life that's free from hate and revenge. And I think on the surface, we're all like, that sounds great. But then exploring what it means calls up some things in us. So I want to go there. We're still in Matthew 5. We're going to finish Matthew 5 today. Let's go. But Matthew 5:38 is where we start. It says, you've heard it said that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, not to oppose an evil person. If someone slaps you on your right cheek, turn to him your other cheek as well. If someone wants to sue you in order to take your shirt, let him have your coat too. If someone forces you to go 1 mile, go 2 miles with him. Give to everyone who asks you for something. Don't turn away anyone who wants to borrow something from you. There's like a natural thing that's in us as people. That when we get hurt, we want to retaliate. And if you have had kids or if you've been around kids, you know how this goes, right? And the kids actually demonstrate a really important principle here, because you'll find them in mid-crisis moment. Everybody's crying, and you're like, what happened here? And one kid is like, well, he touched me, so I hit him, And then the other kid's like, well, he hit me, so I pushed him down, And then the kid's like, well, he pushed me down, so I went and found a stick, and I brought it back, and I beat him over the head with it, It's like, and kids demonstrate that what happens is when we get hurt, we don't just like to retaliate, we actually like to escalate. It's like, you hurt me, I'm gonna hurt you worse. You did that, I'm going one step further. And the thing about this is Jesus is referencing this Old Testament law that was given to the people, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And it's in there, it's in the Old Testament. This isn't one that the Pharisees made up or stretched the truth on or anything like that. This is actually what was in there. But what we miss sometimes is that the whole point of this law was, because it seems so weird to us now, you poke out my eye, I poke out your eye, pretty soon everybody's blind. But the reason that this was here was actually to limit escalation. So it wasn't like eye for an eye, eye for a head, well, he poked my eye out, so I chopped his head off. It's like you couldn't do that now because it was limited. It was like, we're gonna take everybody trying to make it, one step bigger. When we get back at each other, we're gonna actually dial that back and say, you can't take more than what they took from you. They knocked the tooth out, you can knock their tooth out, but you can't knock all their teeth out. This was the point of this law. It was given to actually limit how far we would take our desire for things to be made right, so to speak. You could only exact the recompense equal to the damage that was done. And to imagine how this would play out, right? If we were up on the roof, we're putting on shingles, and I smash your finger with my hammer, you don't get to push me off the roof. It's actually helpful. I'm glad this law was in there. The most that can be done would be a finger for a finger, and I'm not talking about rush hour on reserve. You know what I mean? A finger for a finger. I'm glad you guys laughed at that, because the setup, I felt like I was forcing it, but you laughed, that's good. We can move on. It's actually pretty fair if we think about it. It's pretty fair. And in some ways, I think we've convinced ourselves that revenge is justice. Revenge is just balancing the scales. They're tipped because of what you did to me, and I'm gonna tip them back so that they're balanced. You took something from me, it won't be fair unless I take something from you. I had to suffer, so you need to suffer too. But Jesus comes along and he confronts this idea. This isn't how Jesus wants us to do things. I've only had one opportunity to experience I was at kids camp one time. I was a kid actually, and that year, our church didn't go, but my mom took me anyway, and I got to my cabin. It was actually a tent, and I got in there, and there's a kid in there, and somebody's like, hey, look at this kid. He can pop his eye out. And I was like, well, that's pretty weird, but I want to see it. And so I go over there, and sure enough, he pops his eye out, and he holds it in his hand. He's like, see? It's a glass eye. And then he holds his eyelid open so that I can see what's there when his glass eye is not in there. And I'm like, this is one of the most shocking things I did not expect to see at kids camp or ever. I was 10 years old. And I'm like, it's kind of cool, but it's also kind of gross, but it's also kind of cool. And then I'm like, how did that happen? And he's like, my cousin shot it out with a bow and arrow. And I was like, are you serious? at least the arrow stopped with your eye and not your brain. I don't know how to react to this. And then he's like, yeah, and my cousin's right there. And thank God that these guys did not do an eye for an eye. In fact, they were still friends. They were like, cool, glad you're in our tent. And then they headed out together. And I was just like that dude shot your eye out and you guys are just cool with that? But they were, they'd moved past it, I guess. They maybe did therapy, I don't know. But yeah, it was pretty intense. So we spent the week together in a tent. But an eye for an eye, while it feels fair, it's not what Jesus calls us to. And there's this moment in this scripture where Jesus talks about if somebody slaps you on your right cheek, turn the other cheek. But he's saying don't oppose the evil person. And this was like a theme in the early church, that they felt like the call here was to not mirror evil. In other words, if you think about the first slap being evil, if you've ever been slapped, and sometimes you deserve it, but if you don't, you're like, that was kind of evil, that was bad. And Jesus says, don't oppose the evil person. But what he's saying is that the second slap does not become righteous just because the first slap happened. In fact, the second slap, the slap back, this is like a Dr. Seuss book. The slap back is actually just as evil as the first slap. See, sometimes in life, we think that you win by being the person who hits the hardest. And eventually, maybe they're going to stop hitting you because they know how hard you hit, and that's how you can protect yourself. But Jesus says you don't win by hitting harder than the person who hit you. You win with love, the kind of love that lays down its right to retaliate. In fact, instead of self-defense, Jesus actually calls us to self-sacrifice. Offer the other cheek. If somebody wants your shirt, give them your coat too. You have to go 1 mile, go 2. This whole 1 mile, 2 mile business, a lot of you probably know this, but in those days, Israel was occupied by Rome. So they were under Roman occupation. And the Roman army could tell them to go 1 mile. They had a burden to bear, and a Roman soldier could come up to any citizen and say, you got to take this at least 1 mile. They couldn't make him go past 1 mile, but they could make them take it 1 mile. You see this play out in Jesus' crucifixion when the Roman soldiers get Simon and they make him carry Jesus' cross, because they could do that. They could just point to you and say, you carry it now. And you can imagine, if you were under occupation, you probably didn't love this rule. You probably didn't love the Roman soldiers anyway, because they represented oppression and your lack of freedom or total freedom. And then on top of it, it's kind of salt in the wound when they come to you and they make you do their work for them. And you don't have any choice about it. You can't say no. But maybe the redeeming factor was you could, count the steps, and when you hit 1 mile, you're like, that's it, I'm done. You can carry your own stuff from now. And they probably just grab somebody else to carry it. But you were done. But you can imagine how this sounds when Jesus is like, okay, yeah, technically you're off the hook at 1 mile, but go 2. You can almost sense there's like a little bit of, resistance in this, but it's like a loving resistance. It's like, you won't break my love. Slap me in the face, you won't break my love. Force me to carry your burden, you won't break my love. try to take my shirt, you won't break my love. When I was in elementary school, I don't know if I've ever told you this story. Maybe I have. If I have, I'm sorry. There's probably somebody here that's new for it. We used to get these tickets when your account was like almost overdue. You know, like you'd go to check in for lunch, and they'd be like, you got to tell your mom you only have $5 left in your account. And then the next day, you only have $2 left in your account. Then the next day, you're at negative $1. And they'd keep giving us these, printed tickets. And we're supposed to take them home. But what I would do is I would, the lunch line wound by this radiator. And the radiator had a cover on it with some slots in it. And I would just fold up those tickets and deposit them in the slot. And I did this for almost an entire school year. In fact, some of my friends saw it. They started doing it too. And then I just started finding other people's tickets that they left laying around. And I'm like, oh, I'll just pop those in there as well. Well, as you can imagine, at some point, the janitor took off the cover to adjust the radiator. And what he found was like all of these lunch tickets, which would have been great, except for they also had our name on them. So you couldn't just be like, well, they're not mine. I don't know who did that. It was like, no, we know who did that. It was you. And so we got called into the principal's office. Me and two friends were the chief offenders. And then there was a couple kids that we had just popped theirs in there. And of course, they were in there. And I was like, no, listen, they didn't do this. Let them off the hook. So she did. She let them off the hook. But for us, she sentenced us to an entire week of staying inside at the lunch recess, and we had to carry people's trays for them and clean up the lunchroom before we could go out to the playground, which would usually take almost the whole lunch period because we had to wipe down the tables and put them away and everything. And it was during spring, when kids get really antsy, you just want to be outside. So it was kind of tough to accept at first, but we still had some resistance in us. And we kind of got together and we're like, hey, you know what we should do? We should tell her, the principal, that we actually like doing this and that we want to do it until the end of the school year. See, now you could sense the rebellion here. And this is not a love rebellion necessarily, but I think it illustrates my point a little bit. And so we did. So we get to the end of our week. She brings us in, she gives us the well, I hope you learned something from this lesson, and we're all just, doe-eyed. And we said, yeah, we did learn something. She's like, well, what did you learn? We learned that we really like cleaning the lunchroom after lunch, and we would like to do it till the end of the school year. To which she answered, no, go outside. And I felt like I won that skirmish, right? Like we didn't want to be broken. And as believers, I think there's a call here to not be broken, to not let our love be broken no matter what comes against it. No matter how hard it is, no matter how cruel it is, no matter what we endure and suffer, to not let our love be broken. It's a little rebellious. It's a little bit punk rock. It's defiant, but it's choosing love over hate. And it's choosing self-sacrifice. Weirdly enough, it's kind of like Jesus, who did not retaliate, even to the point of being murdered on a cross for false charges. And at the very end, he's still saying, Father, forgive them. Offering his love. You can put me on a cross, but you can't break my love. Of course, Christ is resurrected, and that's sort of, I think, the point a little bit, is that there's resurrection power in our self-sacrifice. Even though it feels like death, God is at work when we turn the other cheek. He's at work when we give them our shirt and our coat. And he's at work when we go the extra mile cheerfully. He's at work in our laying down our lives and being Christ-like. And the thing about resurrection, it's the one thing, the one drawback, you might say, is that it requires us to experience death in order to be resurrected. Nothing has ever been resurrected that didn't die first. So if it feels like dying to love our enemy, then that's actually a good thing because it sets us up to experience resurrection life. Jesus goes on. He says this, and I think these two are kind of connected. He says, "You've heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy." Now, the last one was in the Bible. This one is not in the Bible, okay? That's what's interesting about this one part, right? Is that Jesus, in the Old Testament, we are told, in the law, we are told to love our neighbor. But what happened is that this commandment to love your neighbor became balanced by this idea that you can hate your enemy, though. You ought to love your neighbor, but it's permissible to hate your enemy. And Jesus goes on, he says, "But I tell you this, love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. In this way, you show that you are children of your Father in heaven." I love that part. I think it stuck out to me this time more than ever before because I think sometimes we would put a lot of things in the category of like, hey, if you want to show that you're a child of God, what should you do? You know, and you might put a lot of things in that bucket. Go to church, worship, be a good person. You might put a lot of things in there, obey the 10 Commandments. You might even put things that are like really spiritual because maybe you've experienced some people that seem really spiritual. You're like, man, that like, they just really seem godly. And when you think about that, you can think of reasons and, you know, later in this, in the next couple chapters, Jesus talks about this moment where people come to him and they're like, "Lord, didn't we prophesy in your name?" You know, we would think, well, that if somebody prophesies in Jesus' name, that seems like they would be a child of God. And yet the thing that Jesus says marks you as a child of your Father in heaven is that you love your enemies. That you pray for those who persecute you. And he goes on to explain why. He says, he, that's God, that's our Father in heaven, makes his sun rise on people, whether they are good or evil. He lets rain fall on them, whether they are just or unjust. If you love those who love you, do you deserve a reward? Like he's getting to our natural tendency, isn't it? Everybody naturally loves those who love them. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. Even the tax collectors do that. Are you doing anything remarkable if you welcome only your friends? Everyone does that. That is why you must be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. I love this for one reason. It releases us from a retributive view of God. I call this karma Jesus. And karma Jesus isn't real. Okay? This is the Jesus that's like, God, why is all this bad stuff happening to me? Are you mad at me? What did I do to offend you? And as much as we're like, well, that's not Jesus, it's like, haven't you ever felt like that still? Like I have. We have these runs in our house where like, there'd be like a couple months where everything breaks and I'm fixing the dishwasher again. I'm fixing the car again. I don't have money to fix whatever the other thing that broke is, but I should fix it. You know, and it's like, sometimes when you're in one of those runs, you're like, God, like, it is I, your humble servant, you know, who only wants to do good in the world. And are you judging me? You know? But But that's not how God works. And Jesus is very clear. He's like, look, he makes the sun shine on the good and the evil, the just and the unjust. He causes it to rain for them too. And growing up a farmer's kid, when the rain wasn't happening, it's like, pray for rain, people, like, what did we do wrong? But that's not how God works. He pours out his kindness on the good and the evil, on the just and the unjust. He calls us to be perfect as our Father in heaven is perfect. But it's in reference to this idea that we have the ability to pour out our kindness and our love on not just the people who are good to us, but also the people who aren't. And he calls us to bring that love and bring that kindness and to give it to even those who despise us and who treat us with contempt and those who go out of their way to even hurt us. I think when I think about like, who's my enemy, I'm like, it's a tough question. It's not clearly defined. I don't have a dartboard with anyone's face on it, that I'm throwing darts at. But what's easier for me to think sometimes is like, if you were in a room with people, is there anyone that could be in that room that would make you not want to be in that room? Where you're like, oh, they're here? Get me out of here. Because if that brings somebody to mind, if that brings a face to mind, like there may be somebody in your life. And I like the idea of being in the same room with that person because I think this must have been so interesting. Because when we imagine heaven, like whatever there's a lot of bad theology about heaven, in my opinion. There is an age to come. And in that age to come, there's a very good chance that you're going to be in the same room with somebody that you don't like. I was thinking about this because I was imagining like the Apostle Paul getting to, the marriage supper of the Lamb, and he like looking around, the name plates are on the the name tags are on the plates, like, oh, this is where is my table. And then he looks at the plate next to him and it's Stephen, and he's like, this would be kind of awkward if you're not aware. Stephen was the first martyr and Paul was there basically making it happen. And so Paul supervised Stephen's death. And can you imagine what that would be like? Then you get to heaven, you're like, so anyway, we have some things we should probably talk about. Here's what I think is amazing, is that it's not going to be awkward at all. And I'll tell you why. The last words that Stephen spoke while he's being pelted with stones that would take his life was this. In Acts, it says, he fell to his knees shouting, Lord, don't charge them with this sin. And with that, he died. See, Stephen had already embraced the way of Christ, offering forgiveness and love even for those who were taking his life. And this is how the early Christians understood enemy love. Band, you can come. We're just about done. The early Christians understood enemy love to be like an essential hallmark of what it meant to be a believer, what it meant to be a follower of Christ. And it makes sense because it was very real that you would be genuinely persecuted for following Christ. We get mad if people make a blog post that they don't like us or a YouTube video. It's like, I'm just being persecuted for Jesus. It's so hard that video is out there saying that they don't like Zootown Church. Like, early church was not dealing with YouTube videos. They were dealing with people that were trying to kill them. And so it makes sense that you would have to grapple with this idea of, do I really love my enemies? Is my love really unbreakable? Or can it be broken? Justin Martyr, one of the early church fathers, wrote, "While neither they nor you are persuaded by us, but strive earnestly to cause us to deny the name of Christ, we choose rather and submit to death, in the full assurance that all the good which God has promised us through Christ, he will reward us with. And in addition to all this, we pray for you, that Christ may have mercy upon you. For he taught us to pray for our enemies also, saying, love your enemies, be kind and merciful as your Father in heaven is." Maybe you have somebody who comes to mind really easy. I know who my enemy is. In 9th grade, I knew who my enemy was. There was one junior that just made it a point to make my life hell. Maybe it's obvious in your life. Maybe it's not. Sometimes it's hard to take a step forward in loving our enemy. It's like, I don't know where to start. And honestly, starting feels like too much right now. We started this morning like God sees you. He sees you. He knows. He knows what's been done to you. He knows what you've suffered. He knows the pain. But he still is calling you to this kind of mercy. He's still calling you to not let your love be broken. I love that Jesus gives us the option of prayer. Because sometimes when you're stuck and you're like, I don't know how to take a step forward, you can always pray. So I want to invite you just to stand with me. And that's where we're going to start today. We're going to start by praying the mercy of Christ over your enemy. We've been trying to make a habit of making the end of our service a moment with Christ, a moment with Jesus, that when we come and take this communion, that Jesus is present in it. And so as we come and we take the communion and we take it to our seat, to just make that a space where then we can listen for the voice of Jesus. We can listen to him speak to us. And you don't have to be a member. You don't have to do a class to take communion. You just have to have faith in Jesus. And we see the act of taking communion as an act of faith in Christ. And so I want to invite everyone to participate. But this morning, as you come forward, you take the bread and the cup and you take it back for a moment with Jesus. I just want to challenge you. Maybe there's somebody and you're like, man, they broke my love. Jesus can heal that. And it starts with a prayer. So I want to invite you, if God brings someone to mind, to sit with that for a moment, and then to also pray for the mercy of Christ for yourself, but also for that person. Whoever is your enemy, whoever is the person that you would want to slip out the back door if they slipped in the front. To begin to let God work on your heart and to pray blessing, to pray mercy, to turn your love toward that person. And in that way, take the first step of loving our enemy. Take the first step of doing good to those who persecute us.